to Okay. Right now, I'd like to start our webinar. Welcome to Michigan CASA's Education Series. This is our first presentation of 2022. My name is Jane Becker, and I'm Director of Training. And on behalf of Patty Sabin, our President and CEO, and Jennifer Collins, the Director of Operations, we would all like to thank you for joining us today to learn more about special education support for our children in foster care. Before I start with introductions and tell you a little bit about Michigan CASA, the first thing I would like to do is thank the GMB Foundation for their generous gift that actually was selected. We were selected by their employees to grant this generous gift to us that will support our ongoing educational series trainings all throughout 2022. So thank you, GMB Foundation. Now, a little bit about Michigan CASA in case we have a couple of people out there that are getting to know us. We are a nonprofit organization, and we knit together the local programs among 28 counties in Michigan by providing them services and support, such as learning opportunities like today, our state conference, marketing help, and opening new programs. All of this is all in order to change the lives of abused and neglected children throughout the state of Michigan. And the end goal is the same as yours, to end the cycle of child abuse and neglect, one child at a time. We are so happy to have our volunteer advocates with us today who want to learn more about this topic so that you can represent your child's needs more effectively. Combined, you volunteers of all of our Michigan CASA programs have 2,258 years of advocacy experience here in Michigan. And you've generously contributed over 57,000 hours of advocacy each year. You have our profound gratitude. I'd also like to welcome our local CASA staff and our colleagues from other associated organizations. Thank you for all you do to support our volunteers and to support children in need in Michigan. This webinar is being recorded and it will be uploaded to our michigancasa.org website under the Learning tab. And because it's a webinar and not a Zoom meeting, all of you participants don't have your own little square on the screen, but you can still interact with us by using the chat box for chatting and processing and thinking out loud. But if you have a question for our presenters, I would very much like you to use the Q&A box. And then that way we're looking specifically in the Q&A box for your questions. We will be watching those and we will be answering them as they come in. All right, now I'd like to introduce our presenters from the Special Education Mediation Services, which is an organization that helps students by fostering cooperation and effective teamwork among those who plan those students' education. The overall goal is to help students and parents and educators make decisions that improve educational outcomes. So today we're going to be hearing from Beth Kohler and Diane Cullis about collecting academic and behavior data at home so that you can help provide that data for a better educational outcome for your CASA student. Beth is an outreach representative with Special Education Mediation Services. Prior to that, she spent the majority of her career in higher education fundraising and grant writing, but took an early retirement in 2017 to be more available to her now adult son, Cameron, who has Williams syndrome. He has received special education supports and services since he was 18 months old. And Beth has a lot of experience as a parent of a student who received these kinds of services. Diane Cullis is an intake specialist with SEMS. She's an MSU graduate in special education for the hearing impaired. She worked at the Michigan School for the Deaf for 30 years and the Kentucky School for the Deaf as well. She also holds a degree in instructional technology and several degrees in educational leadership. She's an experienced educator who worked in the field of special education since the 1970s. She currently is an intake specialist. So I want to thank you both for being here. And with that, I'd like to just hand it over to you. I want to remind our participants, use the chat box for chatting, use the Q&A box anytime you have a question for our speakers. So Diane and Beth, I hand it to you.
Thank you. Jane, I want to retract one thing I told you earlier. If you would please keep an eye on the Q&A along with Diane, because I'm sharing my screen and it's going to be more difficult for me to see it.
Will do.
So I'm going to go ahead and get that started now.
Okay.
And hopefully, let's
see your screen.
Yeah, I need to get to. And I need to switch monitors. There we go. All the fun stuff. So thank you very much, everybody, for having us today. We really appreciate the opportunity to talk about special education mediation services. It's a program that we feel really passionate about. And specifically, we'll talk more about data collection as promised. So Jane already introduced us. I don't have anything to add to that. Diane, do you have anything to add to the introduction?
No, it was really nice. Thank you.
So I was thinking when you said you had thousands of hours of experience combined, one of the fun things we like to say in our office, our intake staff with Diane, Laura, and then Cheryl also provides support on intake. Diane, it's over 100 years of experience, special education experience combined. I don't know how many years over 100 it is, but I know it's over 100. So that always makes me chuckle.
We quit counting at 100.
Okay. All right. That's good.
That's outstanding.
Good. Right. So one of the things that we wanted to let you know about today is we're a grant funded initiative of the Michigan Department of Education Office of Special Education. We offer free mediation, IEP facilitation, and collaborative communication training to schools and parents across the state of Michigan. It's a federally mandated service, so every state in the nation has a dispute resolution program that has to offer mediation. Michigan's program offers more than that, and that's through our meeting facilitation services and our professional development like we're doing today. We're not going to get into the nitty gritty on those today, but just know that in the future, if it's something you want to know more about, it's certainly something that we can provide more information on. So we've been in existence since 1997. We've helped thousands of Michigan students who receive special education supports and services through our office. And we're free all the time. You won't get a bill. You won't get an invoice. There is no charge for the services that we provide out of our office. So today we're going to share information about the most common issues with regard to data collection. We initially developed this presentation last year when the majority of Michigan students were spending at least some of their school week in the home environment. I know that's kind of a bouncing ball right at the moment, depending on where you live. It has a significant effect on whether you're in person or you're remote. But this is information about how to be supportive. So in special education, I can tell you as a parent that I was always helping collect data at home. So this doesn't have to be just a pandemic related thing. It can be a thing that helps support the education team with progress monitoring all the time. So more specifically, we're going to talk about how progress and IEP goals is supposed to be measured, how to determine what data needs to be monitored and collected, practical tips for collecting quantitative and qualitative data, and how to track questions or observations you might want to raise with the IEP team with regard to how the student's doing at home and at home during remote instruction. I guess just apply everything we say to all the time, not just during COVID. That would be the easiest way to say that. So, Diane?
In this section of the presentation, we're going to discuss IEP goals. Your child's IEP should include an annual goal for goals. It may have one, it may have many. Data collection as part of the IEP is most commonly referred to as progress monitoring. Each goal must have short-term objectives or benchmarks, smaller steps to help the student meet the goal. And if you're not sure what the smaller steps are, you can ask your IEP team or the case manager. What skills should my child be learning to make progress toward his goal? This all came about because in Michigan Administrative Rules for Special Education, updated in 5/27/20, it states that the IEP team shall develop a written individualized educational program that includes a statement of measurable annual goals, including measurable short-term objectives. So you should know what those short-term objectives are. And in your IEP, it should have how often they will progress monitor those goals. Typically, you'll get those whenever a child receives a report card. Sometimes they'll put in there, it should be sooner, 2 weeks, every month. You should have progress on how your child is doing toward their goals. In the present level of academic performance, the PLAF should include present levels that are used to create the goals, information related to the most current IEP and classroom data, pertinent information regarding the student's needs, and qualitative as well as quantitative data. This is a summary. The present levels is a summary describing the child's current achievement and performance in the skills areas affected by the disability as determined by their evaluation. The strengths and weaknesses need to be pinpointed as to what the child is able or unable to perform in the general education curriculum. IE teams may find it easier to address this component of the IEP by framing the discussion around specific questions. For example, they might ask itself these 3 questions. How will the child's progress be measured? When will the child's progress be measured? And how well will the child need to perform in order to achieve his or her stated IEP goal or benchmark or objective?
So something to note about the present level of academic achievement and functional performance, or PLAP statement. If you're attending an individualized education program team meeting on behalf of a kiddo that you're supporting, it's pretty common to receive these statements at the meeting, and they're because there's no regulation on when you get them. It's just, it can say, I think they're supposed to be distributed before the meeting, but before the meeting could be 1 minute before the meeting starts. So they can be really heavy. They can be really technical. They can use a lot of terminology with regard to reading scores and levels and things like that. And so if you receive that information at the meeting, there is absolutely nothing wrong with you saying, I need 10 or 15 minutes to absorb this, and then to be able to write down the questions you may have to get clarification about that. Don't just accept that statement without fully understanding what it means. That's my advice.
So when they talk about how the progress is measured, each goal should be measurable. Sometimes they write very loose, very unmeasurable goals. Tommy will do well in class. That's not measurable. They need to be more specific on what they're going to measure. They should describe the skill or behavior they're going to learn, increase, or master. For example, if your child were speech eligible, if they're learning to do the R, it should tell you how often they should have to use the letter R sound in a word in order to know that they're learning it, they're increasing it, or they've mastered it. Each goal should clearly outline the level of performance the student is expected to achieve to meet the goal. Do they need to earn 80%, 90%, 4 out of 5, 2 out of 3? There should be clear outlines of what they need to achieve to meet that goal. And each goal should include a statement of how often the data should be collected, like I mentioned before. Most typically, they'll say whenever a general education student receives a measurable outcome, that student would get measurable outcomes on their goals. Like example, if there's a midterm report, if there's a trimester, they get a grade, they get a report card. If they get any kind of other thing at the end of the year that says the child is eligible to move on to the next grade. Anytime they give any kind of a measurement of achievement or an outcome to a general education student, that should be the same time that you receive progress monitoring, unless they determine that it's going to be done more frequently. This is a list of words. and I want you to look at them for a minute and say, measurable or not measurable? Try to pick out some that you think might not be considered measurable. Somebody put in the chat, enhance. That would be a little bit difficult to measure. Understand, that's a difficult one to measure. Appropriate, that's a difficult one to measure. Feel, you're doing pretty good. Okay, let's see the next slide. Okay, the ones in green are you're pretty sure that you can measure those. They're going to draw something. They're going to turn in something. They're going to read orally, retell, match, sequence, label, even say, understate, trace, list. Some of them, you can't, when you say determine, you'd have to continue and put down more data in order for that to be measurable. Appreciate. We see that a lot if the child's supposed to like appreciate music or appreciate something. Enhance. What does it mean by enhance? Are they supposed to add 4 additional words to the sentence, 2 additional words to the sentence? Seek. That's very difficult to understand either. There's some where develop and feel. If you put enough extra data with that, sometimes those can be measurable. Participate, that can be measurable sometimes if you put a lot of extra data with it. Appropriate, if you say he's going to assume appropriate behavior. Well, what is that for appropriate behavior? It needs a lot of explanation so you know what's appropriate. So that's why sometimes you have to watch. And if they put non-measurable words in your child's goals or objectives, you need to say, well, how are you going to measure that? I don't think that's a measurable word. And you can go ahead. Yes.
Oh, Diane, because I can't add to my own Q&A box, I'll just ask my question. So if I'm a CASA volunteer and I'm involved in that meeting, I can speak up in that meeting. And I can point something out like that we need that to be a better measurable word, or that word is going to be really hard to measure.
Right. You can say
it would be appropriate.
That would be, well, yes, because I think you take the position of an advocate, and advocates are, and if you're there invited by the parent, you can speak with the parent. Yes.
Great.
But yeah, I mean, you can say to the district, well, that doesn't sound like a measurable word to me. How are you going to measure that? And see what they say, and they may end up changing it. Or you could say, you could offer a more measurable word that you think might be appropriate.
Okay, thank you.
As you review your student's goals, to the best of your ability, you need to determine if they are measurable. That's part of your parental involvement, your parent involvement, and as an advocate, your involvement in the IEP meeting. If the goals do not appear to be measurable or cover skills that you feel are appropriate to meet your students' needs, you have the right to request an IEP meeting again, or a meeting to develop an amendment to discuss, update, and or revise the goals. Many times, as Beth said, parents and advocates participate in the IEP meeting, and there's so much information being shared, and it's being put usually in some electronic document and then the parent doesn't get an actual copy of the written document till maybe a day or two after the meeting, rather than right there at the meeting. As you review it later, don't be afraid to call another meeting. Don't be afraid to ask for a meeting to develop an amendment to discuss or update or revise those goals. Once you get home and you study them and you think, wow, this really isn't measurable, or what does my child have to do to meet that goal? Don't be afraid to do that. Your parental rights and parental procedural safeguards allow you to have that right to do that. Now we're going to talk a little bit about some of the data to be collected. In a nutshell, yes, as an advocate, you have a right to do that. A parent has a right to do that too. Anytime you get a document, and Beth can probably attest to that better than even I can, because it's been a long time since my child had an IEP. If you disagree with anything, you have a right to write a dissenting report. You have a right to ask for another IEP meeting. As I said, you have a right to ask for mediation. You have a right to file a state complaint. Parents have a lot of procedural safeguard rights in terms of making sure that their child's IEP meets their child's needs.
Something too, I think that this did not occur to me until much, much later in the education of my son, Cameron. But on everybody's IEP form in the state of Michigan, there is a checkbox that says, I have received a copy of the procedural safeguards and I understand them. And the school has an obligation to help you understand them. So if you don't understand them, don't let them check the box. It's just a suggestion because it's complicated. So are you ready next for the next one, Diane?
Yes.
Okay.
In a nutshell, you need meaningful data to know if the child is making progress toward their goals. Data is collected to monitor IEP progress, but also collected to tell us when progress isn't happening.
Did I go too far?
Yep. I'm still talking about that one.
Okay.
That's okay. Timely data tells us if a student is struggling, so changes can be made if necessary. And data collection serves as a source of reinforcement for teachers and therapists. It can tell them when a child is progressing. It also serves to tell the IEP team that the IEP supports and services are being implemented and are appropriate for the child. In the time of the COVID shutdowns and the school districts who have chosen to start school virtually rather than a face-to-face or in-person schooling option, the parents have often become the students' instructional support. Right now, some school districts after the holiday decided to go virtual for a couple weeks after the holiday. Different things happen all the time, or if like right now, some of them are shutting down for short periods of time because their numbers are increasing rapidly with the new variation of the variant of the COVID. This situation has often given the parents the opportunity to provide progress monitoring on their students' goals. The parents' goal monitoring may differ from the school staff's monitoring because of the differences in the at-home versus the school program setting. And in the many different scenarios, there was full virtual with classroom teachers teaching lessons. There was full virtual with a purchased program where it was Edgenuity, Odyssey-ware, Sociology, Schoolology, and there was no real direct contact with a live teacher. There was full-time in-person and there was a hybrid of some in-person and some virtual. Some kids went to school 2 days a week, stayed home 2 days a week and did virtual and vice versa. The list could go on and on. This opened up a variety of instructional and behavioral data to observe and collect. For example, the data the teacher would collect in a virtual school setting conducted live with Zoom or Google Classroom on a student's goals might be very different than the data that a parent would collect when the child participated in a full virtual purchased program without a live teacher. So you can see there's a lot of different variations in all that data that could be collected.
And, you know, some school districts across the state, not all, actually have virtual options that students can enroll in despite any pandemic protocols. So this is good to know, like I said, when there is no pandemic too.
Right, and most of those programs have become the ones where they hire a company like Edgenuity or Odyssey-ware to provide a virtual program, and that's where all the data is collected by that canned program, not a live teacher. So that's when a parent can watch their child and observe them doing those canned programs and really give a lot of feedback to the IEP team about what's not working or what works well for their child. So these are the two types of data that are often used to collect data on goals. Quantitative, that can be counted or tallied. We all know how to do the little tick marks, the little 4 slashes and a slash across it. And then qualitative, this is the data that characterizes or gives feedback. And oftentimes qualitative gets forgotten. And there's a lot of different data collection methods. For quantitative, it can be counted, measured, and expressed using numbers. That's where you get the 4 out of 5, the 80%. is objective, to the point, and conclusive. Very often it's very solid, very concrete data, used a lot in math and different subjects like that. Suitable for data analysis. When you see bar graphs, when you see pie charts, those all come from quantitative data. Could be used to ask how many, how much. They're closed-ended. You can't go on and say, well, it's because of this or that. No, they got 2 out of 3 correct, and they give you some quantitative data. And it's often generated through tests. Most of the tests your child will take, the M-STEP, the NWEA, most of those are quantitative data collections. Qualitative is descriptive and conceptual. It's categorized based on traits and characteristics. Most behavioral data can come from descriptive and conceptual, categorized on traits and characteristics. Non-statistical, typically unstructured or semi-structured in nature, can be used to ask the question, why? Why did this happen? What happened? And then open-ended, and often generated through observations and notes. A lot of times you'll see in the progress report, it'll say teacher observation, therapist observation, and that's how the data was collected. And then there's a HTTP there. A link that you can use to go and learn more about the qualitative versus quantitative data. Quantitative data, numerical data in the forms of counts or numbers, such as number correct on a worksheet. A tally sheet collecting number of responses for a social or a behavioral goal. Like if it's an ASD student and they're supposed to say a certain socially acceptable response if something happens. Each time they make that socially acceptable response, they're supposed to put a tick mark on a sheet so they can tally and say, well, 12 times he was able to make 4 correct responses. You'll see rating scales. You'll see face-to-face interview on a list of closed-ended questions. They'll ask the student questions, but there's only like yes or no, true or false type answers, not real quantitative or qualitative answers. Most historically, this is collected by the school staff.
Diane,
Yes,
we do have a question from Bart Demeter, if this is a good time for you.
sure.
Okay. Doesn't the qualitative show the student as a person who should be treated differently than the statistical data?
Actually, I'll tell you, in my estimation, for a well-written IEP, you need both. And often they only go with the quantitative, and they very seldom do a lot of qualitative. But you really want both. I mean, you as a parent want to know, how well is my child doing in math? And very often that's with the tick-off data. That's with the quantitative. How well are they doing is usually graded. But then what you want to do is the qualitative side of it is why. Why are they only able to add fractions and not subtract fractions? There's, that leads to some qualitative data. Or why, if the child is supposed to do a certain socially acceptable behavior, as we say it, and they're having a difficult time with that, that would be your qualitative data that would try to figure out why something isn't happening that they can actually rate. So if it's a real well-written IEP, regardless of what the child's disability is, there should be both types, because parents really want both types, in my estimation.
Mm-hmm.
So speaking of qualitative data, as Diane was talking, I was just thinking about, when you go to the doctor and something's not right and you're having all these tests run and the doctor comes back and says the tests are all negative and you say, but doctor, I still don't feel right. That's when you need both, right? What the qualitative data is giving you a little bit more information than the quantitative data might be giving you. So qualitative data can be notes from classroom observations, like Diane already mentioned, a student's work sample with comments from their teacher. I have a confession to make. I still have banker boxes of classroom work in my basement for my now 23-year-old son from every grade that he was in during his K-12 experience, just in case we needed it. Someday I'm going to have to go through that all. Feedback from a teacher about students' progress without a grade. Narrative description statements that can't be counted, measured, or easily expressed. Something that tries to answer a question about what actions people take and what motivates them to take those actions. So this does not have to be really high tech. Qualitative data collection can be quite simple. And so I would grab a wire-bound notebook and label it. If you want to use your mobile device and keep notes in it, you can do that. But this specific example is just trying to give people an ease of mind over, you don't need a special tool to collect qualitative data. You can grab a wire-bound notebook, label it what it is, give it a start date, and just start recording your observations. And so what it could look like is something like this. And I'm going to go ahead and read it in case you can't see it very well. So here's an example of a summary observation, right? So John, it's dated May 17th, 2020. And it says, John loved it when he got to see his teacher's face live on Zoom. He especially loved story time today and when Mr. Jones shared a video of a national park. He hated the math worksheets and would fight me on doing them. I also hated math when I was in school, and I'm not sure I'm showing him the right way it's supposed to be done. I'm afraid that he's going to fall behind in math because of this. I'm also noticing he's not talking as much as he used to. He's very excited during Zoom time, but it's hard for him to wait his turn and click on the right buttons to raise his hand or unmute. I get frustrated helping him too. So it was a conversation on a piece of paper about an experience that a parent had or an advocate or somebody helping the student access a Zoom class. And there's a lot to unpack in there, right? So what is this showing you, right? So we know what's working to engage them. So if you look at the yellow areas, they loved seeing their teacher's face. They loved story time. They loved the video of the national park, and they get excited during Zoom. You know that there's some struggles to keep an eye on, right? So that's what's highlighted in green. They hated the math. Parent or advocates afraid they're going to fall behind in math, not talking as much as they used to, hard to wait turns and use the right buttons when needed. And then we also know that the mom or dad might need some specific parent training, right? They don't know if they're showing the math the right way. And they're frustrated trying to help them engage as well. And so that simple sheet of paper just unpacked a whole lot of data about how this kiddo was doing during one class period, right? Diane?
What could quantitative data look like? Usually you'll see an IEP goal sheet, a goal data sheet, a checkoff sheet. So here's a sample goal. John pupil will correctly add 16 of 20 mixed 2-digit addition, this means with and without regrouping, problems in 3 of 4 consecutive trials. Is this goal measurable? What do you think? Sound good? What data will you need to collect? And what additional data besides the number correct on each of the trials could you collect? So correctly add is the skill that John will demonstrate to achieve this goal. This is quantitative data. The final outcome should be he can add correctly 16 out of 20 problems in 3 out of 4 trials. And what additional data could you collect? We'll discuss this in the next slides. IEP objectives. In Michigan, IEP goals must include at least 2 objectives. These break down the goal into manageable skills. So there's a yearly goal from, say, October of 2020 to October of 21. So how they'll break it down very often, this is what you'll see. John pupil will correctly add 16 of 20 mixed two-digit addition problems in 3 out of 4 consecutive trials. That's the yearly goal. So what they'll do for objective 1 is John will correctly add 16 of 20 two-digit addition problems without regrouping in 3 out of 4 trials by January. So they'll give him from October to January to learn how to do it without regrouping. Then he'll correctly add them with regrouping by May of 2021. So now we've covered regrouping, without regrouping, and with regrouping. Is there a bottom more to the slide?
Nope, I think that's it.
Okay. All right. So then how many problems John gets correct on each trial? We need to collect that. How many of the trials does he achieve 16 out of 20 problems correct? What type of problem is he getting wrong? With regrouping or without regrouping, or a mix of both? Are there certain numbers or number combinations that he seems to have trouble understanding? Has he mastered this goal? Is he able to complete all 3 trials at more than 80%? So is he ready for another goal? Is 80% a high enough mastery goal? Should it be 100%?
So one of the things that Diane and I talked about when developing this presentation, geez Louise, over a year ago, was, you know, the percentage needs to be appropriate, right? The sticky wicket about special education is everything is based on a word that's not measurable. Appropriate, right? So is 80% high enough? Should it be 100? Well, it depends on the goal, right? So as a parent, if my kiddo is in a program and they're working on independence and bathrooming skills, I'm probably going to want to shoot for 100%, right? And 80% might not be enough. It really does depend on the skill that you're trying to build. And it's based on the reasonable mastery for that specific child that the goal is written for, with respect for their disability. It truly is an individualization.
Ladies, question for you. What happens if the school, the teacher says, yep, he achieved this goal. I tested him, it's great, and it's working. But when you work with your child, be you the parent, the foster parent, or even the CASA advocate that might be just helping out that day with tutoring or something, what happens if you can't replicate that? Like, it's pretty clear he's not getting it 80% of the time when he's at home. What's the appropriate thing to do in that case?
You can ask for a meeting. Say, you know, I'd really like to discuss this with the teacher and say, you know, what are the differences between in school and outside of school? You may find out that hanging up on a wall in the schoolroom that they're not thinking about is a multiplication chart or an addition chart or something that the child is using as a tool that you don't know about that's not being used at home. Sometimes just having a conversation, asking to have a conversation about it and saying, you know, you sent me home this progress report that says that he's mastered this goal, and I'm not seeing that in the work that he's doing at home. And sit down and actually have I mean, if you have a copy of the work you've been doing at home, take it to the teacher and say, you know, I'm not seeing this. I mean, because I think that's what happens too often is children learn topic specific skills in certain places and they can replicate them in some places and can't in others. It's just like a lot of parents will say, well, you're working on that behavioral skill, but my child never does that at home. And we've noticed this a lot I've noticed it in my time, because ASD became a big deal during my years of working through the schools. I remember when we didn't have any ASD kids or any kids that were ASD. Then all of a sudden they started trickling in, and then all of a sudden it became this big explosion of ASD students. But many times it's in school, parents couldn't understand that every 45 minutes in a school building or every 50 minutes, you have to move the kids to another task. That's the way it thinks. At a certain time, you have to go to lunch. At a certain time, it's your turn to use the bathroom. At a certain time, it's your turn to take them outside for recess. Where at home, the autistic child could get involved in an activity and they wouldn't say to them after 45 minutes, oh, you got to stop that activity and we got to go over here. And so parents got, so it was a totally different environment. And that's why sometimes the goal was measurable and worked in school, didn't work at home, and vice versa. So it's just asking questions if you're seeing something that you don't think is right, that doesn't appear to be good or right or working well. So
Thank you.
does that help?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Okay. So this is a sample worksheet that would have been one of the trials. Okay. And you can see some of them are checked right and some of them are checked wrong. So did he meet the 16 out of 20 criteria on this? He only got
Everybody's frantically counting.
Yeah.
They're all counting.
Oh, okay. Welcome. All right. He got 13 out of 20 correct. Okay, so we need to look at what problems he's having with some of these different test questions. So did anybody notice what type of problems he missed? Was it with or without regrouping?
Does anybody need to be reminded what regrouping is? Because Diane had to remind me what regrouping meant. That's when you're carrying over to the next column, right?
Right. So like on the first one, 11 plus 9. 9 plus 1 is 10, so it should have been 20, not 21. So any special number combinations? Yeah. Somebody picked it up. He's missing the ones with the number 9 in the right-hand column. So what could that tell you as a teacher? That he's weak in the area of his 9s. He's not sure about 9 plus 1, 9 plus 2, 9 plus 3. So he could use some review on the 9s. And most likely that should have been, oops, that should have been discovered when we went back. If you remember the objective, when we did it without regrouping, that should have been discovered in the second short-term objective, which was when we first introduced regrouping. The teacher should have, would have picked up on the fact that he was having difficulties with the 9s.
Ready?
Yes.
Okay.
So this is where you could also do it, a skill sheet, a sample skills data sheet for the goal. Okay, he got 10 out of 10 right for without regrouping, but he only got 3 out of 10 with regrouping. So his total correct was 13 out of 20. But he did, so he can add without regrouping. Where he needs to add is the regrouping. And then we need to go back and see how many of those regrouping ones were the 9s. And once we correct the 9 problem of him not understanding the 9s, maybe then he could have gotten the 18 out of 20. I didn't look back at the, can you go back to that worksheet again? He missed 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 of the ones he missed were with the 9. So that would have made it 17 out of 20. So almost. So.
Okay. So Diane, in the interest of your time, it's 1:46. I just wanted to point that out to you. So here's another goal, right? So student will attend to and participate in large group activities, remaining seated, imitating actions, making choices, following directions, attempting and completing tasks for 30 minutes with no more than 2 prompts and 7 out of 10 opportunities as recorded on the teacher-made chart by the annual review of the IEP. So it's a mouthful, right? What data do you need to collect? So if you look at that really carefully, there's lots of different things that we're measuring in this goal. So
While they're thinking about that, Beth, I just want to say thank you very much. And I've got to hop over to my other presentation. So it was nice talking to you. If you have any other questions, just let Beth and I know, and then we can try to answer theirs for you. Okay?
Okay.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Diane.
Diane.
Nice working
Good to
with
see you.
Bye-bye.
bye-bye. Diane is a wealth of information. So like she said, if you have extra questions and I can't answer them, then I will be happy to pass them on and get back with you through Jane. But so here's what we're measuring: that they remain seated, that they are imitating actions, that they're making choices, that they're following directions, that they're attempting tasks and completing tasks. There's a 30-minute time limit. They only get 2 prompts and they have to get it right 7 out of 10 times. So what short-term objectives do you think might help to break this skill into manageable objectives? So I would say objective 1 could be remaining seated and imitating actions. Objective 2 could be making choices and following directions. Objective 3 could be attempting tasks and completing tasks. And then what areas of the school would you need more information to be able to collect data on? And I would encourage when you're advocating on behalf of a student, don't do a complicated goal like this. You have to have 2 objectives. The Michigan Administrative Rules for Special Education require that each goal have 2 objectives. If you don't want to have 15 goals, and then just break down on what is a reasonable thing to keep track of. I got in the habit of writing really complex goals with my son's team. And as time went on, we stopped doing it because quite frankly, the team wasn't measuring them anyway. They had so much on their plate that it was just really too complicated, not just for my son, but also for the team to appropriately measure. So some of the things that you're going to need more information on to be able to collect the data is, what does it mean to imitate an action? What is that supposed to look like? How can you be successful doing that? What's a prompt? And what is an opportunity? And this is when you have a right, again, as a parent or advocate, to ask questions and question the goals in your student's IEP during the team meeting and ask for some clarification. Okay, so from what we discussed regarding quantitative or qualitative data, the type of data that you feel you should collect regarding each of these skills with regard to these things. And if you want to type them into the chat, we are running short on time, but if you want to pop them into the chat, if you have some ideas and types of things that you could do to collect data on this, this is just a slide to get you thinking about the difference between quantitative and qualitative data. And what does remain seated look like, right? Do they have to crisscross applesauce? What if they can't? What if they physically can't cross their legs and sit up straight? So I'll tell you a really quick story about my son Cameron when he was in kindergarten. So Cameron's disability, he has very low muscle tone, means he's a floppy noodle, right? And so in an old-fashioned classroom, the one that I was raised up in, you had to sit up straight and look at the teacher at all times, because that's how the teacher could tell if you were paying attention, right? Eyes on me, right? Well, there's a lot of kiddos where the eyes on me is a very uncomfortable thing for them to do, right? If they're on the autism spectrum, that eye gaze may be really, really challenging. Well, for Cameron, sitting up straight was really challenging. If he's got to use all of his mental and physical energy focusing on sitting up straight, guess what he's not listening to? The math lesson, because he's focused so much on sitting up straight and attending to think about, what does that success look like? Again, individualized to the student for whom the IEP is being written to support. So this is just another example of a skill sheet that you can use. Anybody who's ever had a behavior plan or who is in a pediatric practice for maybe some attention or mood challenges has seen this kind of a chart. It used to reside on our refrigerator in our kitchen because we would keep track of all of the different types of things to collect data. So this is an area, though, where the qualitative data collection can really enhance the goal progress. You know, for example, as we taught, imitating actions can be a very gray area, right? Whose actions are the students supposed to imitate? Right? They could be imitating Susie sitting right next to them. They got the goal right. They were imitating actions, but they weren't the ones you wanted them to imitate. So you have to be really much more specific than that, right? you might record something like when John is asked to imitate actions, he's very distracted and influenced by the students around him, right? So that gives you an idea of what can we do to better support John so he can achieve this goal. Could be, sitting away from a particular group of kids that they tend to get a little more rambunctious about. I know for Cameron, my son, one of the specific difficulties we had with that sitting up straight and looking forward was in the younger years is that circle time, that carpet time when all the kids would gather around the rocking chair and the teacher would sit on the rocking chair and read story. Well, he couldn't sit up. He couldn't crisscross applesauce. He wanted to lay down. Well, when you're laying down in that tight little circle, you're getting into people's spaces and it's, Cameron's, in my area and all that kind of stuff. And so we wound up with the team meeting purchasing a beanbag chair. Well, then it got to be, well, if Cameron gets to sit in a beanbag chair, all the other kids should be able to sit in a beanbag chair. And so we bought, because we had the resources to do it, 2 beanbag chairs. And Cameron always got one. And then the kids got to take turns sitting in the other beanbag chair. So that made Cameron kind of cool because if they got drawn to sit next to him in the beanbag chair. So just, you can be really, really creative in helping these students be successful in achieving these goals. Making choices is another great area because we want them to make that appropriate choice, right? The word appropriate, it's plagued in the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act is talked about so many times, right? But that's a really subjective thing. So let's be more specific about what we want our students to accomplish and achieve, right? Did he understand the question that was asked? That kind of stuff. All right. So just pop in if you have any questions or observations about anything I'm talking about, because it is 1:54. So I'm going to keep moving. But, some things to think about in the past 2 years. Can you believe 2 years? I read a news article the other day. There was an epidemiologist from the University of Michigan that thinks 2022 is it. We're going to be done. And I'm so hopeful that that person knows what they're talking about. But you don't have to use education speak to do this. Like you saw in that example that we provided on the notebook, just record what you witnessed and what you felt while you were recording it. Your contribution as a member of the IEP team is just as valuable as any other member, and categorizing your comments while you're writing them can make it more complex in the moment than it needs to be. It's like journaling, right? So anybody out there who's a social worker or a therapist or has experienced that, it's a free flow of what you're watching. You're going to collect more information. And then, like I did, go back and highlight what you think might be the most relevant. So anyway, these questions were taken from a survey that were sent to parents after the first year, after the great shutdown of 2020, and just some things to think about. But again, like I've said all throughout this presentation, these are great questions to ask all the time. There's lots of environments. There's lots of students who receive home-based or home-bound instruction that you may be supporting. And so these are always questions that can be asked to help better support the students that are receiving the services.
And Beth, if I may interject, you
sure.
and I were talking before all of this. I used to be a classroom teacher, and I've advocated for students that are school age and that have IEPs. And I just think that little list of questions that you had right back there would just be great to have in my advocacy notebook, because you can help the parents, foster parents, bio parents, become more active in this. Remember, a lot of the parents of our kids, our bio parents, they get really uptight when they walk into a school. They may or may not have done well in school. It's not a safe space for them. And I know a lot of parents who are just like, I just don't know anything about going into that conference with the teacher. I don't know what to ask. This can help them frame some of those questions so that they can be an active member of the team. Just a thought.
Absolutely. I think about this all the time. And, I've had advantage since the day I was born, right? And my father was president of our local school board. So my parents were involved in my opinion, way too much while I was growing up. But now I look back retroactively and I'm super appreciative of it. It's how I was raised. The parents were involved in school, and everybody hasn't had that hasn't had that type of experience. And telling you that I had that experience, it's hard. It was really, really hard to learn all this stuff about how to advocate for my son. Hard, intimidating, frustrating, and plus also I had a 40-hour-week job that I had to do in addition to all of that. So the playing field isn't even, right?
You're right. Yeah,
but
for sure.
Hopefully, hopefully those parents that are showing up have the love and the care for their child, to want to do the best they can by them. And you guys are there to help support them in doing that, right? And doing it for them if they can't.
Yeah.
So
I'm going to catch you with another question that just came
Okay.
in from one of our participants. They write, I would like people to know that things such as mental health disorders, anxiety, PTSD triggers, and needing to leave class for these items, along with needing extra time for homework and tests, are some other things an IEP can help
Yeah.
with
Absolutely.
for preteens and teenagers. If you'd like to expand on that, please.
Yeah. So one of the, absolutely. And I can speak for my son who has had challenges, behavioral challenges his whole life. And those have not gone away. They've just evolved into different 23-year-old things. We had a pass system for him in school. And so, but what that looked like when he was younger was a teacher would notice maybe Cameron was going, there were some what do we call these, antecedent events? There were some events that were happening, and the teacher would say, hey, Cameron, I need your help. I need you to run a note down to the principal for me. Could you do that for me, buddy? And then you know what the note said? Mrs. Principal, Cameron needed a break. Please talk to him for 30 seconds and send it back to my classroom, right? So as the students get older, that has to look different. And we had a case, and we use this case in our trainings a lot, where there was a student who was really having some experiencing some trauma, experiencing some bullying, had an unstable home environment. Grandma was the person who was in charge of raising the student at that time. And do you know what the solution that they mediated? Like, his locker was a sense of real anxiety for him. He did not like where his locker was placed. He didn't feel that the students that were surrounding him in his locker were supportive in a way that was healthy. I'm using grown-up words. Those are not the words that the student used. And you can imagine how many times Grandma probably had to say to the school, please move his locker. And the school probably said, well, if we move Johnny's locker, we're going to have to move everybody's locker that wants their locker removed. Well, gosh darn it, if we didn't mediate that. What a simple solution, right? Move the kiddo's locker. And that's what our mediators helped do. Plus also, Johnny was then allowed to go see the school social worker anytime. Free pass, middle of a test, middle of a history lecture, middle of a whatever. If Johnny felt in that moment, I got to go talk to the school social worker or it's going to get ugly, Johnny was allowed to get up and go talk to the school social worker. And so that's what our program does. We help those families and those schools work out solutions that are not typical usually. Sometimes they're super simple. It just takes a person outside of the situation to see things more clearly, so that student has a strong plan so they can be as successful as possible in school. So on that note,
Thank you.
That's our contact information. And I think the last conference I might have been at before the great shutdown was the CASA conference in Novi. So I think some of you may have, if you were there at the Novi Expo Center for that, you may have stopped by our booth and gotten some of this information, but we're here all the time. If you ever have questions, please don't hesitate to email or call. Like I said, our intake line, it's staffed by just some amazingly knowledgeable people. And we're all very passionate about what we do. So, and thank you all for everything that you do for our kiddos, because it's such important work.
Oh my, well, thank you, Beth. And for those of you who might be furiously scribbling all of this down, I will have this on our website. under the learning tab. This whole presentation will be there, and you can go back over some things if you wanted to get some of those questions or some of those key phrases. This is
I can give you
super
a
helpful.
PDF. Jane, do you want me to send you a
Oh,
PDF of the
That would be even
presentation?
better.
You bet,
Because
no
I can,
problem.
and
I'll
I can
send that.
upload that then to the
Yep.
website. You'd be okay
Yep,
with
you
that?
bet.
I
Sure.
will do
Mhm.
that we will
Okay.
have those together.
Okay.
It's very, very helpful. And I can see that we could have like 20 more of these on different topics.
Yeah.
Because I do know that our advocates, I don't think they really understand how involved they can get. And it can be you can be the bridge, I think, that
Mhm.
that could be very necessary.
Mhm.
Any other questions out there among our participants, and drop them in the Q&A. I've been watching chat, I've been watching Q&A. And I think it's one of those situations that everybody's got to take this away and think 10 minutes about it, like you guys were
Sure.
saying after the
Sure.
IEP meeting.
Right. Right.
So yeah. Oh, so anyway, I'm just double checking for Q&A, and I'm not seeing that, but we do have a line to you, and
Yep.
and I really, really appreciate, Beth, your all the time that you put into doing this with Diane. Thank you very, very much.
Our pleasure.
And before I sign off, I just want to thank everybody for coming, and I want to make sure that you know about next month's educational series. We're going to welcome back Kelly Hurst, who you met during our November annual conference. She was our keynote speaker on racial bias. And she promised me at the end of that she said, Jane, I want to come back and keep the journey going with Michigan CASA. She knows that we want to learn more and more about how we can address any kind of biases that could be within us or within our communities that we need to know, so we can effectively advocate for a student who may not look like us. So pencil in right now, Tuesday, February 15th at 2:00 for Kelly Hurst. Tuesday, February 15th at 2:00. Registration information will be coming from your local CASA programs. Your local director will be sending all of that out. I'll have that pushed out as soon as I can. But she, as you know, if you were at our conference, you know that Kelly is very interactive, and she wants a lot of questions, and she wants you to process with her. So she's going to be with us to do that. So again, thank you, Beth and Diane, and thank you to all of our participants. I really appreciate it. Thanks so much, and
Have a
stay
great
warm
day,
out
everybody.
there.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.